My hands are up. I'm not resisting. You're escalating this without cause.
Turn around. Stop talking.
I am complying. You're being recorded. Think very carefully about your next move.
The scream shattered the humid afternoon silence of the gas station. It wasn't a request. It was a hysterical command vibrating with adrenaline and the dangerous instability of a man who had lost control of a situation he never understood in the first place. Officer Kyle Vance, 28 years old and trembling with a mixture of fear and rage, had his taser drawn and leveled at the chest of the man standing by pump number 4. The man facing the weapon did not scream back. He did not run. He did not plead. Marcus Thorne. 62 years old, 6'4", and built like the heavy steel of the Ford F-250 King Ranch he had been fueling, simply raised his hands slowly to shoulder height. His palms were open. His face was a mask of stone, a look forged in places Officer Vance had only seen in movies, places like Fallujah and the Korengal Valley. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice a deep resonant baritone that carried no tremor. "I am standing still. My hands are empty. You are making a mistake that you cannot undo." "Shut up. Turn around. Do it now." Vance lunged forward, closing the distance, his finger hovering over the trigger. He wasn't seeing a retired Marine Corps colonel with a Silver Star and 30 years of service to this nation. He wasn't seeing a grandfather who served as a deacon at the First Baptist Church. Through the tunnel vision of his own bias, Vance saw only a large black man in a predominantly white suburb standing next to a $70,000 truck, refusing to bow down. Vance holstered the taser and grabbed Thorne's left arm, wrenching it behind his back with a force that was entirely unnecessary. Thorne winced a sharp intake of breath through his nose as the torque hit the metal pins in his shoulder shrapnel remnants from an IED blast in 2004. "Stop resisting!" Vance shouted for the benefit of the dashboard camera, though Thorne had not moved an inch to resist. "I am not resisting," Thorne stated clearly, looking directly at the bystanders who had frozen at the pumps nearby. "I am complying with a lawful order under duress. Watch this. Record this." Vance kicked Thorne's legs apart, forcing the older man's knees to buckle. He shoved him downward. Thorne, preserving his dignity even as gravity took him, controlled his descent, going to his knees on the oil-stained concrete. The grit and dirt dug into his dress slacks. The humiliation was sharp, but the discipline was stronger. "You're done," Vance panted, pressing his knee into the small of Thorne's back, driving the air from his lungs. "You think you can just ignore me? You think you run this town?" As the handcuffs ratchet-clicked onto Marcus Thorne's wrists, tight enough to bite into the skin, the colonel closed his eyes for a brief second. He wasn't praying for himself. He was praying for the young man on his back. Because Officer Kyle Vance had absolutely no idea that he had just assaulted a man who had commanded thousands of Marines, a man who currently sat on the Civilian Oversight Board for the county, and a man whose understanding of the Fourth Amendment was sharper than the blade of a K-bar knife. Vance yanked Thorne up by the handcuffs, sending a jolt of fire through the veteran's reconstructed shoulder. "Walk," Vance spat. Thorne opened his eyes. The rage was there deep in the furnace of his gut, but he capped it. He looked at the young officer with an expression that wasn't fear, it was pity. "I'm walking, son," Thorne said softly. "But understand this, your career ended the moment you put your hands on me. You just don't know it yet." Before we unravel the catastrophic series of events that led to a $2.3 million payout and the utter destruction of a corrupt officer's life, I need you to do something. If you believe that a badge is a symbol of public trust and not a license to bully, hit that like button. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, state, city, or country. We want to know who is standing watch with us. This story is going to make your blood boil, but you need to see how it ends. To understand how a simple act of refueling a truck turned into a civil rights disaster. We have to rewind the clock exactly 12 minutes. It was 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. The sun was high and bright, casting long shadows across the pavement of the majestic gas station on the corner of Oak and Main. This was a quiet, affluent part of the city, the kind of place where neighbors waved to one another and the lawns were manicured to military precision. Marcus Thorne had spent the morning at the Veterans Administration Hospital advocating for two young soldiers who were being denied benefits. It was work he did for free, a continuation of the oath he had taken at 18. He was tired but satisfied. He had stopped to fill up his truck, a pristine, deep maroon Ford King Ranch edition that he kept in showroom condition. He was dressed in a crisp, button-down shirt tucked into khaki slacks with a leather belt that matched his loafers. He looked like exactly what he was, a successful, retired professional. He was standing by the pump, watching the numbers tick up, his mind drifting to the Sunday school lesson he was preparing for the weekend when the cruiser rolled in. Officer Kyle Vance was on patrol, or rather he was hunting. With only 4 years on the force, Vance had already developed a reputation in the precinct, though not the kind that earns respect from seasoned veterans. He was known for his stats, high numbers of stops, high numbers of tickets, and a disturbing number of resisting arrest charges that usually involved minorities passing through the district. He was looking for action in a sleepy town, desperate to prove he was a hard charger. Vance saw the truck first. It was too nice, too clean. And then he saw the man pumping the gas. In Vance's mind, the equation didn't balance. Black male, older, expensive vehicle mid-afternoon on a Tuesday. Why wasn't he at work? How could he afford that truck? It fit the loose, internalized profile Vance had been operating on for years, the imposter profile. Vance pulled his cruiser up behind the Ford, blocking it in. He didn't turn on his lights, not yet. He just sat there for a moment, running the tags. The computer returned the result instantly. Registered to Marcus A. Thorne. No warrants, no stolen report. Clean driving record. A good officer would have driven away. A smart officer would have waved. Vance did neither. He stepped out of his car, adjusting his utility belt, placing his hand on his hip near his service weapon. A command presence stance he had practiced in the mirror, but looked rigid and unnatural in the field. Thorne saw him in the reflection of the gas pump glass. He didn't turn around immediately. He finished topping off the tank, replaced the nozzle, and waited for the receipt to print. He knew the routine. He had been a black man in America for 6 decades. He knew when eyes were on him. "How we doing today?" Vance called out as he approached. The tone was faux casual, the kind of greeting that isn't a greeting but an opener for an interrogation. Thorne turned slowly, securing his gas cap. "I'm doing fine, officer. Can I help you with something?" Vance stopped 5 feet away. He looked Thorne up and down, his eyes lingering on the expensive watch on Thorne's wrist. "Nice truck. King Ranch, right? Those go for about 80 grand. "It's a reliable vehicle," Thorne said evenly. "Is there a police matter you're attending to?" Vance smirked. He didn't like the tone. It wasn't submissive. It was the tone of an equal, and Vance didn't believe in equals on the street. "Just checking in. We've had a lot of vehicle thefts in the area recently. High-end trucks like this. Just making sure everything is on the up and up." Thorne stood his ground. He didn't fidget. He didn't look down. "I haven't heard of any thefts reported on the community alert system. And since my tags are current and I'm pumping gas in broad daylight, I assume you've already run the plate and seen that this vehicle belongs to me." Vance's smile vanished. He took a step closer, invading Thorne's personal space. The air grew heavy between them. "I didn't say I ran your tags. I'm talking to you. I'm asking you a question. Is this your vehicle?" "You just said you were checking on thefts," Thorne replied, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. "Now you're conducting an investigation. Which is it? Is this a consensual conversation, or am I being detained?" Vance blinked. He hadn't expected the legal terminology. Most people stammered. Most people handed over their license just to make him go away. Thorne wasn't most people. I'm asking for your identification, Vance said, his voice hardening. Let's start there. And I am asking for your reasonable suspicion, Thorne countered. Under Delaware versus Prowse, you cannot stop a motorist simply to check for license and registration without specific, articulable suspicion of a crime. So, officer, what crime do you suspect me of committing? The air at the gas station seemed to curdle. The hum of traffic from the main road faded into the background as the standoff intensified. Officer Vance felt a flush of heat creep up his neck. He was being challenged publicly by a man he had already mentally categorized as a suspect. The fact that the suspect was quoting Supreme Court case law didn't serve as a warning to Vance. It served as an insult. You want to play lawyer? Vance sneered, his hand dropping closer to his holster thumb, unsnapping the retention strap. I don't need to explain myself to you. I'm investigating a potential stolen vehicle. That gives me the right to identify the driver. Now give me your ID. Marcus Thorne looked at the young man. He saw the insecurity behind the badge. He saw the danger. He had commanded young men like this in combat, boys with too much power and not enough wisdom. But in the Marines, there was a chain of command to check that aggression. Here on the street, Vance was a loaded weapon with a faulty safety. Officer, Thorne said, his voice steady as a heartbeat. Let's be very clear. A potential stolen vehicle is not a specific report. Does this truck match the description of a specific vehicle reported stolen? Make, model, color, and license plate. Because if you ran my tags, which I know you did, you know this vehicle is registered to a Marcus Thorne, and you can see that I match the description of the owner. There is no discrepancy. There is no reasonable suspicion. This is a fishing expedition, and I am not biting. You're obstructing an investigation, Vance barked. He was loud now, projecting, trying to draw the attention of anyone nearby to validate his authority. Refusal to identify is a crime. Only if I am lawfully detained, Thorne corrected him, not raising his voice. For a detention to be lawful, you need reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. Standing at a gas pump is not a crime. Being black in a King Ranch is not a crime. Unless you can articulate a crime, I am free to go. Thorne turned back to the pump to grab his receipt. It was a dismissal. He was ending the engagement. That was the moment Vance broke. In his mind, turning away was an act of aggression. It was a rejection of his authority. He couldn't let this man just get in his truck and drive away. If he did, he would look weak. He would lose. I didn't say you could leave. Vance stepped around the pump, positioning himself between Thorne and the driver's side door. You are not free to go. You are detained. Thorne stopped. He took a deep breath, calculating the odds. He knew the law was on his side, but he also knew that the law doesn't stop a bullet or a taser in the heat of the moment. He looked directly into Vance's eyes. For what? Thorne asked. State the crime. Put it on the record right now. Disorderly conduct, Vance improvised, grasping at straws. You're causing a scene. You're being belligerent. Thorne looked around. The gas station was quiet. A woman at Pump 6 was watching her phone, raised recording. A man inside the store was looking out the window. I am speaking to you in a normal conversational tone, Thorne said. You are the one shouting. You are the one escalating. Officer, I am a retired colonel in the United States Marine Corps. I have spent my life defending the Constitution you are currently violating. I strongly suggest you call your supervisor before you do something that will end your career. The mention of military rank didn't sober Vance. It enraged him. He felt small. He felt mocked. He interpreted Thorne's calm confidence as arrogance. I don't care who you think you are, Vance spat. Turn around. Put your hands on the truck. I'm searching you for weapons. I do not consent to a search, Thorne stated. I am not armed. I have no weapons on my person. You have no probable cause. I said turn around. Vance reached out and shoved Thorne's chest. It was a hard shove meant to off-balance him. Thorne didn't stumble. He absorbed the force his boots planted like tree roots. He didn't strike back. He didn't flinch. He just looked at Vance's hand, then back to his eyes. "That," Thorne said quietly, "was assault." Vance panic blinked. He realized he had crossed a physical line. He needed to justify the shove. He needed to make Thorne the aggressor. "He's reaching!" Vance yelled to the phantom audience, stepping back and drawing his taser. "He's reaching for his waistband, gun." Thorne's hands were clearly visible at his sides. He hadn't moved. The accusation was a lie, a fabrication designed to cover the officer's loss of control. But once the words were out, the sequence was locked in. Vance had created a fictional life-or-death scenario, and he was going to act on it. The atmosphere snapped from tense negotiation to kinetic violence in a heartbeat. The sight of the yellow taser aimed at his chest changed Marcus Thorne's calculus instantly. He knew the ballistics of the situation. He knew that any movement, even a flinch, could be interpreted as a threat. "Get on the ground!" Vance screamed the command we heard at the beginning of this story. Thorne went down. He did it to survive. He did it because he knew his wife was waiting for him at home, and he intended to make it there even if he had to go through a jail cell first. As Vance pinned him to the dirty concrete, the physical reality of the situation set in. Thorne's cheek was pressed against a spot of dried oil. The gravel bit into his skin, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold fury burning in his chest. Vance was frantic. He was clumsy with the handcuffs, his breathing ragged. "Stop resisting. Stop fighting me." He kept yelling, creating an audio record for the Bodycam that completely contradicted the visual reality. "I am compliant," Thorne said, his voice muffled by the ground. "Check your Bodycam, officer. I am not moving. Watch my left shoulder. It is surgically reconstructed. If you wrench it, you will cause permanent damage." Vance didn't listen. He yanked the left arm back with no regard for the joint's mechanics. Thorne grunted a guttural sound of pain that he couldn't suppress. The metal cuff clicked shut. "You should have just listened," Vance hissed into Thorne's ear, his weight pressing down on the older man's spine. "You think you can lecture me? You think you're special?" "I think," Thorne wheezed, "that you are making a catastrophic error in judgment." Vance hauled him up. Thorne stood unsteady for a moment, waiting for the dizziness from the pain in his shoulder to subside. He looked around. The woman at Pump 6 was still filming. He locked eyes with her. She looked terrified. "Do not stop recording," Thorne said to her, his voice clear and projecting. "Please, ma'am, do not stop." "Shut up." Vance shoved Thorne toward the cruiser. "Get in the car." Vance opened the back door and pushed Thorne inside. The back of a police interceptor is not designed for a man of Thorne's size. He had to contort his body to fit his bad shoulders, screaming in protest. The door slammed shut, sealing him in the stale, plastic-smelling cage. Outside, Vance took a moment. He leaned against the roof of the car, hyperventilating. He wiped sweat from his forehead. He checked his reflection in the side mirror. He looked wild. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself, trying to build the narrative in his head. Suspect was aggressive, refused to identify, reached for waistband, resisted arrest. I followed protocol. He repeated it like a mantra. He got into the driver's seat. He didn't look back at Thorne. He started the engine and peeled out of the gas station lights, flashing sirens, chirping unnecessarily for a transport ride. In the back seat, Marcus Thorne closed his eyes. He began to compartmentalize the pain. He shifted his mind from victim to tactician. He needed to remember every word spoken, every time stamp, every inconsistency. He wasn't just a prisoner, he was gathering intelligence. "Officer," Thorne said from the back, his voice calm again. "I am requesting medical attention for my shoulder upon arrival at the facility." "You're fine," Vance snapped, staring straight ahead. "Don't start with the fake injuries." It is a service-connected injury documented by the Department of Veterans Affairs, Thorne said. Denial of medical care is a violation of my Eighth Amendment rights and department policy. I am formally putting you on notice. Vance turned up the radio to drown him out. He blasted rock music, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, trying to pump himself back up. He felt powerful again. He had won. He had taken the big man down. They arrived at the precinct 10 minutes later. Vance pulled into the Sallyport, the garage door rumbling shut behind them. The secure environment usually made officers feel safe, but as the door closed, Thorne felt a strange sense of calm. This was the arena where the truth would come out. Vance pulled Thorne out of the car. "Let's go. Move it." They walked through the heavy steel doors into the processing area. It was a bustling room, officers typing reports, a drunk tank in the corner, the smell of floor wax and old coffee. Sitting at the high desk was Sergeant Thomas Miller. Miller was 55, a 30-year veteran of the force. He had graying hair, a thick mustache, and eyes that had seen everything the city had to offer. He was reading a file when the door opened. He looked up. He saw Officer Vance looking disheveled and manic, and then he saw the prisoner. Sergeant Miller's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He froze. He squinted, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him. Then the blood drained from his face. He stood up slowly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Vance," Miller said, his voice barely a whisper. What did you do?" Officer Vance didn't catch the tone of dread in Sergeant Miller's voice. He was still riding the high of the arrest, convinced he had brought in a trophy. He pushed Thorne toward the booking bench a little too roughly. "Resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, failure to identify," Vance recited, slamming his paperwork onto the counter. "Guy thinks he's a lawyer. Refused to cooperate. Had to take him down at the pump." Sergeant Miller didn't look at the paperwork. He came around the desk, ignoring standard protocol, his eyes fixed on Marcus Thorne. Miller walked right up to them. "Colonel Thorne?" Miller asked, his voice shaking. Thorne looked at the sergeant. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Sergeant Miller, it's been a while. Since the Memorial Day parade, I believe." Vance looked between them, confused. "You know this guy, Sarge? He's a suspect. He was acting suspicious near a King ranch." Miller turned to Vance. The look on the sergeant's face wasn't anger. It was the look of a man watching a train wreck in slow motion. "Vance, uncuff him. Now." "What? No," Vance protested, stepping back. "He's my collar. He resisted. He was reaching for—" "I said take the cuffs off, you idiot!" Miller roared, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. The entire booking room went silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing. "Do you have any idea who this man is? This is Colonel Marcus Thorne. He's the vice chair of the Civilian Oversight Board. He's the man who signed off on the grant for our new body armor last year." Vance's face went pale. The color drained away so fast it looked like he might faint. He said he was a Marine, but he's a Silver Star recipient," Miller snapped, pulling a key from his own belt because Vance's hands were shaking too hard to work his own. Miller unlocked the cuffs. Thorne brought his hands forward, rubbing his wrists. They were bruised and swelling. "I apologize, Colonel," Miller said, his head bowed. "I truly apologize. Are you injured?" "My shoulder, Sergeant," Thorne said, his voice flat. "Your officer decided to test the structural integrity of my reconstruction. I suspect something is torn." Miller turned to a patrolman nearby. "Get the medic. Now, and get the lieutenant down here." Vance stood there, his mouth slightly open. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him like an avalanche. The thug he had profiled was a man who likely had the chief of police on speed dial. He wouldn't show me ID," Vance stammered, his voice small. He fit the profile." Thorne turned to look at Vance. He didn't yell. He stepped closer, towering over the young officer. "What profile is that son?" Thorne asked softly. "The profile of a black man with a nice truck. Is that the probable cause you used to put me on the ground?" Vance couldn't answer. He looked at the floor. "I want the watch commander," Thorne said to Miller. "And I want the chief. And I want my lawyer. In that order. And I want this officer's body camera footage secured immediately before technical difficulties cause it to disappear." "It's already being pulled, Colonel," Miller assured him. "Nothing is going to disappear. I promise you that." The door to the inner offices banged open. Lieutenant Gregson stormed out, adjusting his tie. He had heard the shouting. When he saw Colonel Thorne standing by the booking desk, rubbing a bruised wrist, and Officer Vance looking like a ghost, Gregson looked like he wanted to vomit. "Colonel," Gregson said, breathless, "please come to my office. We can sort this out. We can—" "I am not going to your office, Lieutenant," Thorne said, standing his ground. "I am a prisoner. I have been arrested. Process me. Take my mugshot. Fingerprint me. I want every step of this documented. Because if you don't book me, there is no official record of this arrest. And I intend for there to be a very permanent record of what happened today." "Colonel, we don't need to do that," Gregson pleaded. "We can release you right now. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding." "It was a deprivation of civil rights under color of law," Thorne corrected. "Book me, or I will add falsifying records to the lawsuit I am filing against this city." The lieutenant looked at Miller. Miller nodded grimly. They had no choice. "Book him," Gregson whispered. "But for God's sake, be gentle." As they rolled his fingers across the ink pad, Marcus Thorne stared into the camera for his mugshot. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a storm waiting to break. The next hour inside the precinct was pure chaos, masked as bureaucracy. While Marcus Thorne sat stoically in a holding cell, refusing the comfortable chair in the lieutenant's office, the command staff was in a full-blown panic. Chief of Police Harrison arrived 20 minutes later wearing golf attire, having been summoned from the back nine of the country club. He smelled of cigars and fear. He huddled in the video review room with Lieutenant Gregson and an internal affairs captain. "Play it," Harrison commanded. On the large monitor, the dashboard camera footage from Vance's cruiser played. They watched the silent approach. They heard the audio kick in. They heard Thorne's calm, measured responses. They heard Vance's escalating aggression. When Vance shouted, "He's reaching," and the taser appeared, the chief winced. "Jesus Christ," Harrison muttered, rubbing his temples. He wasn't reaching. His hands were at his sides. He was turning off the pump. They watched the takedown. They heard the snap of the handcuffs. They heard Thorne warn about his shoulder. He warned him. The IA captain noted, scribbling furiously on a notepad. "Subject notified officer of a pre-existing medical condition, and the officer applied excessive torque anyway. That's deliberate indifference." "It's not just indifference," the chief said, staring at the screen. "It's a lawsuit, a massive one. Thorne is going to own this department by the time he's done." The video ended. The room was silent. "What's Vance's history?" the chief asked. 3 excessive force complaints in 2 years. The IA captain read from a file. "All unsubstantiated. All involving minority males over 40. We had a pattern, but nobody flagged it because the victims didn't have the resources to fight it." "Thorne has resources," Gregson said quietly. "He's friends with the district attorney. He's on the board. Chief, we have to kill this story before it gets out." "It's too late for that," a voice came from the doorway. They turned. It was the department's public information officer, PIO, holding a tablet. Her face was grim. "It's on TikTok," she said, "and Twitter, and Facebook. The woman at the gas station. She live-streamed the whole thing. It's been up for 45 minutes. It has 2 million views." The chief snatched the tablet. He watched the shaky cell phone footage. It was even worse than the dash cam. From this angle, you could see Thorne's face calm, compliant, while Vance screamed like a maniac. You could see the bystanders looking horrified. You could hear the crunch of Thorne hitting the ground. The comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur. Is that Colonel Thorne? They just assaulted a war hero. Fire that cop. This is why we don't trust them. The mayor is on line 1. The receptionist's voice crackled over the intercom. He is screaming. Chief Harrison handed the tablet back. He looked old. He looked defeated. Get Thorne out of the cell, Harrison said. Bring him to the conference room. I'm going to go down there and beg for forgiveness. He won't take it, Gregson warned. I know, Harrison said. But I have to try. In the conference room, Thorne sat with his lawyer, a sharp-eyed civil rights attorney named David Ross, who had arrived within minutes of the call. Thorne's arm was in a sling provided by the medic. Chief Harrison walked in. Marcus, Colonel, I cannot express how sorry I am. Thorne didn't stand. He didn't smile. Save the apologies for the press conference, Chief. I want the incident report. I want the booking sheet. I want the Bodycam footage released to my counsel immediately. We are dropping all charges, Harrison said quickly. Released without prejudice. It never happened. It did happen, Thorne said, his voice hard as iron. And you aren't dropping the charges because I'm innocent. You're dropping them because you got caught. If I was a bricklayer instead of a colonel, I'd still be in that cell. If I didn't know the law, I'd be facing a resisting charge right now. That is the problem, Harrison, and I am going to fix it. We can handle this internally, Harrison pleaded. Vance is suspended. We'll fire him. We don't need to drag the city through a federal court. This city needs to be dragged, Thorne said, standing up. Because until you pay for it, you won't change it. My lawyer will be in touch. Thorne walked out of the police station, his lawyer flanking him. Outside, a crowd had already gathered. News vans were pulling up. The viral storm had made landfall. By the next morning, the name Marcus Thorne was trending nationwide. The contrast was too perfect for the media to ignore. The dignified, decorated black veteran versus the screaming, out-of-control white cop. It was a story that cut across political lines. Conservatives were outraged that a colonel was treated this way. Liberals were outraged at the racial profiling. For a brief moment, the entire country agreed on one thing: Officer Vance was a disgrace. The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. With the spotlight of the national media burning down on them, the department couldn't hide anything. Internal Affairs dug deep into Vance's past stops. They found the pattern the chief had feared. Over the last 3 years, Vance had conducted 60 Terry stops, stop, and frisks. 52 of them were on black men. None of them had resulted in the discovery of a weapon. Only 3 had resulted in actual criminal charges, all for minor drug possession. The rest were released after being humiliated. They interviewed Vance. He tried to claim he felt threatened. He tried to claim Thorne made a furtive movement. But the video didn't lie. Frame-by-frame analysis showed Thorne's hands were visible the entire time. The furtive movement was a fabrication. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division announced they were opening a pattern or practice investigation into the entire department. The mayor, desperate to save his political career, threw the police department under the bus. We have zero tolerance for this behavior, the mayor told CNN. Officer Vance does not represent our values. But Marcus Thorne wasn't letting them off the hook with sound bites. 2 weeks after the arrest, Thorne stood at a podium in front of the federal courthouse. His arm was still in a sling. The MRI had revealed a torn rotator cuff that would require another surgery. They say Officer Vance is a bad apple, Thorne told the bank of microphones. But a bad apple doesn't rot alone, it rots the barrel. Who hired him? Who trained him? Who signed off on his reports when he stopped 50 other men who looked like me, who ignored the complaints? This isn't about one man. It's about a culture that allows mediocrity and bias to wear a badge. The lawsuit filed that day was a masterpiece of legal aggression. It alleged unlawful seizure, excessive force, false arrest, malicious prosecution, and failure to intervene. It named Vance, the sergeant, the chief, and the city. The city attorney took one look at the filing, then one look at the polling numbers, and called for a settlement conference. "We can't go to trial," the city attorney told the city council. "If we put Marcus Thorne on a stand in front of a jury with his silver star and his torn shoulder, they will give him the keys to the city. We have to pay." The negotiations were short. Thorne didn't want a drawn-out battle. He wanted an admission of guilt. Usually, cities settle with a no admission of liability clause. Thorne refused. "I want them to admit they were wrong," Thorne told his lawyer. "Or we go to court." The city folded. They admitted liability. They agreed to a consent decree to overhaul their training on racial bias and de-escalation, and they wrote a check. The settlement was finalized 6 months after the incident. The city paid Marcus Thorne $2.3 million. It was one of the largest individual payouts for a police misconduct case in the state's history. Officer Kyle Vance was terminated. He was also decertified by the state police board, meaning he could never work as a police officer in that state again. He was last heard of working security at a warehouse 3 counties over, earning $15 an hour. But the money wasn't the end of the story. Marcus Thorne didn't buy a new truck. He didn't go on a vacation. He stood in the community center of the neighborhood where he had grown up, a check in his hand. He had established the Thorne Legal Defense Fund for veterans. "This money," Thorne told the crowd of young men and women, "is blood money. It came from pain. So we are going to use it to stop the pain." The fund provided free legal representation for any veteran in the state who had been the victim of police misconduct. It also funded Know Your Rights seminars, teaching young men exactly what Thorne had used to save himself the power of the Constitution. Thorne returned to the gas station 1 year later. He pumped his gas at the same pump. He looked at the spot on the concrete where he had been forced down. The oil stain was gone, scrubbed away. He finished pumping. He got into his truck. A police cruiser drove by slowly. The officer inside, a new recruit, Diverse Young, saw Thorne. The officer didn't stop. He didn't stare. He gave a respectful nod and kept driving. Thorne nodded back. It wasn't perfect. The system was still flawed. The scars on his shoulder would never fully heal. He couldn't lift his arm above his head without pain. But he had held the line. He had forced the system to blink. As he drove away, Marcus Thorne thought about the oath he had taken at 18, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Sometimes he realized the domestic enemies don't look like villains. Sometimes they look like scared young men with badges and unchecked power. And the only defense against them is the courage to say no, and the wisdom to know when to stay silent. This story isn't just about a settlement check. It's about the terrifying reality that even doing everything right, being a veteran, being compliant, being calm, isn't always enough to protect you from bias. Marcus Thorne survived because he had the rank and the resources to fight back. But what about the man who doesn't have a colonel's pension? What about the teenager who panics? We have to ask ourselves if a Silver Star recipient can be treated like a criminal in broad daylight who is safe. Justice was served in this case, but it shouldn't have to be purchased with a lawsuit. It should be the standard. What do you think? Was $2.3 million enough for the humiliation and the injury? Should Officer Vance have faced criminal charges instead of just losing his job? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you believe in holding authority accountable, hit that subscribe button. We're going to keep shining a light on these stories until the shadows have nowhere left to hide. Stay safe and know your rights.